This is Jamie Cashman, the Government Relations Manager here at ISAC, and so we're pleased for those that joined us today to do our annual 2016 legislative webinar and session review. With me in the room, I have Bill Peterson and also Lucas Finken, who's also part of our legislative team. And first item that we'll review are our top priorities for the year. And the first is on mental health and disability services funding. This, over the last few years, has been a continued priority for us. One, to provide a long-term sustainable funding solution for the counties within the regions, and also to provide levy equity for those counties within the regions. What we have seen over the last few years is a disparity between the counties and regions since the legislature decided not to appropriate $30 to $40 million in equalization funding out to the regions. And so, because under current law, the counties are frozen by the 1996 caps, what we're seeing is a disparity between the counties and the regions. And what you're seeing are counties, mostly rural counties, are actually subsidizing some of the urban counties to make the region budgets work. And so what we were pushing for this year, and we did have in Senate File 2318, was a bill that would lift those 1996 caps and allow for the counties within regions to go up to 47.28 per capita. And that passed unanimously on a Senate Ways and Means Committee, but unfortunately it remained on the calendar until the end of session, where there wasn't a lot of movement for our proposal over in the House. And what they decided to do, unfortunately this year, was just to continue the current funding scenario and keep with those 96 caps. So that was one of the last bills they passed to wrap up the session this year. Next, in terms of funding, was on House File 2460. They did provide some supplemental assistance for a couple of regions out there that are financially strapped, and that was in the Polk County region and the Eastern Iowa region. And so $3 million was set for that. Another important component in terms of funding was language for a DHS report. Basically, what it required DHS to submit to the legislature by November would be some language that would be a report that would provide an overview of just the overall mental health redesign and how it's working, the support and the services that are provided, but also to outline as far as the fiscal stability of the system. And so that's something that we're going to be actively participating in the interim, and hopefully we can lay the groundwork to address a final solution, financial solution, going into the 2017 session. Next is on E911 funding. We had a bill last year that increased the percentage of funding going back to local PSAPs from the E911 surcharge. Unfortunately, last year it was line item vetoed. There was another bill this year, House File 2439, and that increased the percentage back to the local PSAPs from 46% to 60%. And we're very pleased that the governor signed that. Actually, it was during the last week of session. Additionally, it set priorities for the carryover funding that would go above and beyond what was left after it would go out to the PSAPs and then the Department of Homeland Security. One of the big things there was a discussion, and I think there's going to be a continued discussion, is the issue of consolidation of PSAPs. And there, as far as the order for the funding for the carryover funding, one of the top things they put at the top was on consolidation of PSAPs, providing some incentives up to $200,000 for PSAPs to do that. But this would certainly be a voluntary thing that PSAPs could participate in. And then above and beyond that, provide some additional money for education and communications upgrades. And the other thing, in terms of emergency management and law enforcement, in terms of communication, was passage of the Senate File 2326. in the state interoperable communication system, and they did appropriate $4 million out of the E911 surcharge that would go towards that. Hopefully this won't be a long-term solution. Unfortunately, they put language in there just to do that for 1 year, but that's something that we're going to have to watch out for going into the future. Next was on delinquent court debt. At the end of last year's session, there was language in the standings bill that would significantly hinder the ability of county attorneys' ability to collect delinquent court debt. And so after much negotiation, a bill was passed and signed by the governor on Senate File 2316. What this would do would assign that court debt to mainly to where the county where the debt occurred, and the county attorney would have access to that debt at day 30. And then it would allow counties to sign 28E agreements with other counties for the collection of that debt, and also creates certain thresholds by population to maintain those debt programs. The next was on distracted driving. Again, we kind of ran into a buzzsaw in the House. There really wasn't an appetite to move that forward. So that's, again, something that we'll be looking at most likely for next year again. And we were pleased, though, that Governor Branstad announced at the end of session, after session ended, that he was interested in addressing some capacity, distracted driving, and also impaired driving by some recent events that happened here in central Iowa. And last of our 5 ISAC priorities was on food fees. As we've seen, as far as the fees haven't been adjusted in several years, and so it's been very difficult for counties to implement their programs to meet the cost of doing business, and a lot of those programs have gone back to the Department of Inspection and Appeals. And so we again have put forward a bill that's Senate Bill 3165. Made out of a Senate Ways and Means subcommittee, but there really wasn't an appetite in both the House and the Senate this year on adjusting fees. And next, we will go over some of the ISAC objectives and go with Lucas.
Good afternoon. Some of the objectives that we were able to accomplish this year. First, on conservation resources, something that we tend to work on every year. 2 parts. First, the Resources Enhancement and Protection Fund, or REAP, has a standing $20 million appropriation, but has unfortunately never been fully funded. So we work each year to push for full funding of REAP. This year, it was once again funded at $16 million, which has been kind of the status quo the last couple of years. So certainly better than years before that when it was down around $12 million. But we will still continue to push in future years for full funding of REAP. And the second part of our objective dealing with conservation resources is support of an increase in the state sales tax of at least 3/8 of a cent. As you probably recall, in 2010, the voters of Iowa approved the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, the establishment of the fund, and then that calls for the first 3/8 of a cent increase in the sales tax to go into the fund for conservation and water quality projects. So unfortunately, the discussion gained a little bit of traction, but unfortunately the legislature adjourned without addressing this year. There was a bill that would have increased the sales tax by 3/8 of a cent, but ultimately an agreement could not be reached. Another one of our objectives has to do with courthouse furniture and equipment, and there was an appropriation of $6.7 million to the Polk County Justice Center for furniture and equipment, and that came in the Rebuild Iowa Infrastructure Fund, or the RIF bill. And finally, we had a bill dealing with public investment trusts. Due to some SEC rules changes that would have changed the way that securities held by these government trusts were valued, we find a solution, and that was done in House File 2261. And basically, it takes the Iowa Public Agency Investment Trust from under the regulation of the SEC to under the regulation of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, or GASB. So under this new regulation, IPATE will be able to have the same valuation methods and the same types of investments as current.
And next, we'll outline some additional bills affecting counties that we were in support of. The first is on House File 2353, which basically makes some updates in Iowa law to make them current with some recent changes in the Hatch Act. And this would basically allow emergency management officials to run for partisan office. The next is on providing some greater clarification on how medical examiners are paid. And so basically this requires that the county medical examiner's office be paid for a preliminary death investigation from the deceased person's county of residence. The county appointment, or where the county medical examiner is housed, could immediately pay the county medical examiner and then invoice the deceased person's county, or it could just provide an invoice to the deceased person's county, and that county could pay the medical examiner directly. The next was interference with official acts against the jailer. What this basically did was just add jailer to the list of county officials that are protected by interference with official acts and penalties that are associated with that. Next is on Senate File 2144 on mental health disclosures. What this does is allows a patient's mental health records to be voluntarily shared with a physical care doctor. It makes it consistent with HIPAA to allow for greater care coordination. For example, this would have to pertain to a drug interaction, to make sure whatever drugs are being prescribed by one doctor won't counteract with the other doctor's prescription. The next is on Senate File 2159. Basically, this is a public health board and modernization. Eliminates a lot of red tape and outdated language that allows for local boards of health additional flexibility on how they're structured. And last was on Senate File 2188 on prescribing psychologists. Basically what this does is establish a new license category for psychologists and adds them to the list in the pharmacy section in Iowa, which allows them to prescribe. Basically, there would be two licenses. One would be a 2-year conditional license under a licensed physician, and secondly, a prescription license that would allow the prescribing psychologist to independently prescribe.
House File 2273 was an elections bill from the Secretary of State's office. One important component is that it adds intelligent mail barcodes to the acceptable markings for absentee ballots for purposes of identifying when that absentee ballot arrives into the postal service. So this is added to postmarks as a way to identify when the ballot is received, and it's an optional service that the Postal Service offers, and then they would give a report to the county auditor of when each of those envelopes arrived into their system. And like the postmarks, these would still be due, or they would still need to be marked the day before the election. House File 2345 requires that the county engineer file an annual report with the DOT, giving an update on the use of road use tax fund dollars and their use in repairing and replacing structurally deficient bridges. And the report will also require details on the work completed or pending on those structurally deficient bridges. There is a 3-year sunset on this, so it is sunset June 30th of 2019. House File 2363 clarifies that a governmental board must allow all members into closed session unless there is a conflict of interest and they do not recuse themselves. House File 2364 clarifies that if the time or location of a meeting is changed, that notice must be posted but does not have to be published. So a classic example would be if a Board of Supervisors has to move to a different location because their boardroom isn't big enough for the attendees, or if a meeting has to be delayed for weather or because there's not a quorum, you would simply post an updated agenda with the new time or the new location at the original site, but you wouldn't have to delay that meeting anymore in order to publish the updated notice. House File 2385 changes the penalty for illegal dumping. It was previously $1,000 up to $1,000 per violation. This bill changed that to $1,000 for the first violation, $2,000 for the second, and $3,000 for the third and subsequent violations. And those dollars go 50% to the DOT and then 50% to the county in which the violation occurred. And Senate File 2170 changes the process for providing notice to bidders. As you know, if a public improvement project exceeds the competitive bid threshold, you must provide notice to bidders. And this changes that process from being a published notice to a posted notice. And the requirements are that it be posted in 3 locations. First, a contractor organization publication, a statewide contractor plan room service, and then the government body's website or the website of a statewide association like ISAC. And so I will point out that if in the future, if you are either unable to post or if you don't have access to be able to post on your website, or if your county isn't in control of their own website, we will be offering this availability, and more details will be coming to you soon on how to use the ISAC website for posting notice to bidders. The bill also changed the dates. It used to be not more than 45 and not less than 4 days before the bid letting that this notice has to be posted, and this was changed to between 13 and 45 days. And finally, the notice of the public hearing that is also associated with these sorts of projects now has to include a brief description and location of the project. And we're happy to announce that once again, all of the property tax credits, standing appropriations, were fully funded once again. And you can see on the screen what those dollar amounts are. I will point out that the commercial industrial replacement claims are going to be capped at this level. In Senate File 295, it was required that this would be capped at the fiscal year 17 level. So that $155 million will be the standing appropriation from now on. And on the business property tax credit, this is the third year of a 3-year phase-in. You'll recall that it started off with a $50 million appropriation in 2015, increased to $100 million last year, and now up to $125 million, which will be the standing appropriation from now on. Well, a lot of what we do up at the Capitol is playing defense. We certainly have control over the bills that we're working on as far as the top priorities and objectives, but we don't necessarily have control over other bills that can get drafted, and sometimes we have to oppose bills that would be bad for counties. And so just to give you a little bit of an update of some of the bills that we opposed this year that did not pass. First, Senate Study Bill 3180 was an expansion on the cell tower siting bill from last year, but it just focused a little bit more on smaller providers. And we opposed this because it would take away some of the local control in zoning and placement of the cell towers. Senate File 165 would change how a county seat could be either changed or the process to go from 1 county seat to 2 or from 2 to 1. And and they would change it from a decision of the Board of Supervisors to a ballot initiative. And again, we thought that this just took away a power of the supervisors that are best placed with those local boards. Senate File 2005 and 2006 both dealt with wind turbines, and it took away the ability to place wind turbines in urban renewal area and then use tax increment financing. We were opposed to taking away tools for economic development and revenue from the counties. Senate File 2068 and House Study Bill 650 were both companion bills that both repealed the bottle bill. And we are opposed to that repeal, and this is the 5-cent redemption for beverage containers. And in fact, we're very supportive of expanding the bottle bill, both in the containers that would get a redemption and potentially moving it from 5 cents to 10 cents. So the repeal is something that we oppose. House Joint Resolution 2005 would have reduced the number of counties in Iowa from 99 to 40. I don't think I necessarily have to explain to you why we are opposed to this, but we know that you're doing a great job, and your citizens certainly appreciate their county government, and a reduction of the counties would do a disservice to the services and programs that you provide and take away a lot of representation. So we were opposed to that. House File 502 dealt with redacting personal information from public websites. So an individual could apply to have any information about themselves that might appear on a county website removed. And finally, we had 5 bills that each one addressed one of the county elected officials besides the supervisors, and would have made the election of those offices nonpartisan. The auditors, county attorneys, and sheriffs all decided to remain neutral on the bills that addressed their offices, but the county treasurers and county recorders chose to be opposed, and so we actively fought against those 2 bills, and ultimately none of the 5 gained much traction.
All right. Well, for a complete summary of all the bills from this session, not only the ones that we provided an overview here earlier, but other bills affecting counties, please go to our website where you can find that. I believe it's underneath the legislative tab, and you should be finding, I believe it's underneath the Legislative Policy Committee that you can provide an overview of those summaries. And with that, before we talk about 2017 in the future, I'll entertain any questions people might have.
And just for clarification, everyone is muted, so you'll have to type in your questions.
All right, well, we can certainly entertain questions at the very end here, but I think we'll move on and talk about the 2017 legislative timeline. The first deadline that we'll have coming up here is in terms of the proposals for legislative objectives and policy statements, and that will be on July 29th. And you can find that also on the legislative tab on the ISAC website, where underneath the LPC, where you can download a legislative policy request form. And so at that date, that's the deadline for individual and affiliate proposals. And then the Legislative Policy Committee will meet, and that consists of 2 members from each of the affiliates, and also is chaired by our second vice president, which will be Lonnie Bulgrave this year. And then the Legislative Policy Committee will meet for the first time August 25th through the 26th here in Urbandale. And basically at that time, we'll provide additional session review and go over the various proposals from the affiliates and any other individual requests. On September 29th, here at the ISAC office in West Des Moines. The LPC will finalize and adopt the objectives and then provide recommendations to the board for what our priorities will be for 2017. At the October board meeting, the ISAC Board of Directors will approve of the legislative packet for the full membership, in which it will be finally considered by the full membership at our fall school on November 30th through December 2nd here in Des Moines. So, with some changes in terms of the schedule going into 2018, there will be some changes that will have to be making some adjustments because of kind of a bumped up timeline. And so this is what we have tentatively put together. This ultimately will have to be approved by the ISAC board at the July meeting here. But here's the schedule for 2018. So call for proposals will happen in June of 2017 of next year. The deadline for next year will be July 28th next year, and then the proposals, something that will be different this year, is all the proposals will be sent out to the full membership for feedback. Then the first LPC meeting will be actually held in conjunction with our annual meeting, and that will happen a day prior to the conference. So that invite any of the LPC meetings, not only this year but next year, all membership is invited to attend and provide feedback. And so hopefully we're hoping that members that will be out here for the annual conference will have greater participation as a result. And then on September, the LPC will recommend the 2018 legislative priorities to the full membership. Then in October we'll have a typical legislative webinar, and then also we're going to a new online voting system. And at that time, we'll be providing an online voting tutorial. And then the online voting will begin at that time. And then ISAC voting members will vote on policy statements as a package and vote on legislative objectives individually, and then recommend the top 5 or 4 choices for our top priorities. And then later on in October, the Board of Directors will meet and to accept the members' votes and set the legislative priorities. And then in November, December, we'll do our typical district meetings and also a webinar to outline what the agenda will be for 2018. And just a few other items I want to provide an update on. The scholarship golf fundraiser will again be out of Toad Valley and Pleasant Hill, and it will be August 31st this year. And then also for the fall school of instruction, registration opens August 17th this year, and then it runs from November 30th through December 2nd at Vets Memorial Credit Union, or Community Credit Union Convention Center here in Montana.
We had a question come in about the voting member, how the voting member is officially decided who gets a vote, which members of the county get to vote, things like that.
We will be, our board is, this is Bill Peterson, our board is currently reviewing the definition of voting member in our articles of incorporation. Right now, anyone that attends one of our conferences or meetings during our business meeting, and they're a county official or employee and registered for the conference, they would have the right to vote. In the future, starting in 2017, the our incorporation will designate that there is a voting member will be made up of the elected officer from each of the 6 ISAC elected affiliates and the chief or department head of the 10 ISAC non-elected affiliates. So ISAC currently has 16 affiliate organizations. So every elected officer will be able to vote, and the department head or the person that's in charge of each county's office for those other 10 non-elected affiliates. And our database will be set up to identify individuals that hold those positions, and when the online voting takes place, your voting credentials will already be in the system. You'll just have to sign in and vote your voting credentials. So it is a significant change, but it's the change of our conference moving from November, or in the case of this year, late November, early December, to the month of August, starting in 2017. We needed to come up with another process for getting membership input on our legislative package, and then allowing the members to approve those legislative proposals that have been put forward to the membership by the Legislative Policy Committee. Is there any further questions on there? You can type those questions into the little box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'd be happy to try and answer them.
Well, if there aren't any other further questions, or if there's some additional questions, after, don't hesitate to email, as you always do, to Lucas and myself. But we certainly want to thank all of you for your participation today, but also your participation during this legislative session. The feedback that we get from you on a weekly basis when we provide our updates, but also when you come to the Capitol to advocate on certain bills is extremely appreciated. And so we look forward to starting work on the 2017 session. And again, thanks for all your assistance this year. Thank you.